start now.
Yes.
Jean, you've had an absolutely fantastic life. You know, I knew you first as a poet. And frankly, let me say that when I started working on Sri Lankan writing at the British Council, I had no doubt that you were the most outstanding, particularly given time and place. You know, we've had wonderful poets in Sri Lanka, but you were the right person at the right time to capture some terrible experiences that this country went through, in particular in July 1983. But before I talk about that, can I ask you a bit about your upbringing? Because I also enjoyed the very different pieces you wrote. Things like A Colonial Inheritance. You were a burgher, born in Kandy, and you had wonderful sort of ancestors whom you describe as quite dotty, eccentric. So tell me about that.
I think they played a tremendous part in my life. From the time I remember, I had two sides of the family. My father's very academic, intellectual, moral, upstanding Methodists, and also travelers. And
that was Solomon's.
Solomon's side.
Right.
On the other side, I had the Grenier Jansers,
Right.
very genteel, but also intellectuals among them, artists, writers, poets, and so on. But their lifestyle, to me, it seems a fantasy world, in the sense that everything was so ordered, so disciplined. And to me, I mean, we are so turbulent in the expression of our emotions and feelings, but they had a marvelous sense of duty and responsibility, even the women folk especially. And I always think of my grandmother Charlotte. In fact, it haunts me. It haunts me that at 16, she was married off to my grandfather, Jans, at 16, and died at 53. She had 13 children or more, and well, the greater part of her life was spent in childbirth. So I think of the women of those eras, and how much they had to sacrifice of their own personalities and talents and gifts to devote themselves to the family.
Can we come a bit closer? Because
Yes.
you know, you were talking about your grandmother with the 13 children.
Yes.
But one fascinating thing I found in your narratives is this interest in spinster aunts, you know, the women who didn't marry.
Yes.
And you talk about this
Yes.
long procession of
Yes.
people supping with death, going
Yes.
into a room. Tell me about your spinster aunts.
Let me take the Jansers. Now, this is the old family house. There was Eleanor, Auntie Nellie. Now, she took over when my grandmother died and looked after all the children. Then I was told that there was a widower who wanted to marry her, but I don't think she wanted to take on another family.
Right.
And there was Auntie May, who was a trained teacher. She didn't marry. I was told that she wanted to marry a Sinhalese who was an organist, but at that time burghers there was very little intermixture. So she didn't marry. Then there was my fantastic Aunt Maud, who used to cycle on a tandem cycle and loved dancing. Oh, she used to tell all my brother and his friends, now promise me, Pat, you must give me one dance tonight at the Queen's Hotel. And she's the one who wore a beautiful old gold velvet gown, ankle-length gown, and went to the station, Kandy Station, to meet the Queen, Elizabeth. Yeah.
And did she meet the Queen?
She did,
Right.
she did.
Great.
Yeah, but
No,
she
they-
was fantastic, but the Jansons didn't approve of her,
Of
in the
course,
sense
naturally,
that
I mean,
she was a lover of life, and she used to say various things. Be very careful, Jean, she used to advise my sister and myself. Be careful of men, you know, they will sip you like butterflies, and that's it. But she fell in love with a married man.
Right.
I better not mention his name, no?
No, please
Yeah, Mr. Pompeius.
do. Right. Oh, yes, I
Yeah,
know the name. Very
Mr.
famous.
Pompeius.
Yeah.
And it was a very painful thing for her.
Right.
So she was sent to Kaduganawa to be with her sister. They called my mother Dolly. She was doll-like, you know. And it was wonderful having her. We accepted them.
Right.
All these adults, they were part of our lives.
No, they sound fascinating.
They were fascinating. Ballroom dancing in the veranda. It's so small now,
Yeah.
with HMV, you know, the gramophone.
Right.
And my friend and I doing the two-step, mingling with them. And you know, the wonderful parties we had, the dinner parties at Royden with Elroy and Gladys, and the homemade ginger beer and the love cake and the formal dinners and the Hawaiian guitar playing and the singing, and it was fun.
No, the Burgers have this wonderful reputation for being eating and drinking people.
Yes.
But that brings me to this very interesting fact. You said, you know, people frowned on your aunt marrying a Sinhalese.
Yes.
Of course, it was one generation later.
Yes.
But you married Arasa
Yes.
from a very conservative Tamil background. I mean, how did both sets of parents take that?
His people didn't take, his father was marvelous, but his mother was very sort of rigid in her ideas about caste and family and tradition and ritual. I didn't understand her because I didn't understand that culture. Burger culture was so very different. I mean, sometimes I think burger culture has been a little too, what shall I say?
Too loose? I would never say that. It is
I
fascinating.
don't know, but the fact is that we were given absolute freedom to discover love or relationships or
sex.
be friends.
Or sex? Or
Probably.
Did you do, right.
Probably.
You're not answering, but doesn't
Probably.
matter. Carry on.
Yeah. But, well, my brother was quite a Lothario, Casanova, till the very end.
Right.
I think your father remembers him very well, Pat. And lots of them. I had some very brilliant cousins. One of them was a marvelous photographer, Heribert Bobby of Chance.
How did Arasa's family cope with all this? They must have been horrified. Or the
I
mother?
don't think they knew.
Right.
I don't think they knew. But I set out to be investigative, and I discovered lots of things about their families also.
Right. Hidden.
Right. I'll tell you one story. Next door, my mother-in-law's sister was married to a lawyer, and his father, probably, I don't know why, but he kept his wife locked up in a bedroom, and the food had to be passed through some kind of...
What was the reason for that? Did you never
Who
find
knows?
out?
Nobody questioned.
Was she straying if she weren't locked up?
I don't know.
What I really like, though, is that in some of your poetry, while you display this great tension of two different views, they show a sort of coming together at the end. There's a lovely poem in which, you know, she appreciates you and you appreciate her. Did that happen?
It happened. She called me the poet Aware, I think.
Really? Right.
Yes. But, you know, bringing up the children and working and so on, I didn't spend enough time listening to it. But she did tell me a lot of things which entered my poetry and my discourse, my narratives, my fiction and everything. And I mean, I felt I had to make some kind of reprieve. I mean, some kind of, I had to say, forgive me for not understanding you. Because for me, understanding of another human being is so important. And I always rebel against the fact that people don't understand me enough, you know. And sometimes I say, I've been crushed, I've had knuckle dusters, I've had this, I have had that. But
well, you survived. Okay. No one can crush you. But before I come to that element that you understood of the Tamil culture, and I've done a wonderful job on that.
Thank you.
Let me go back to your own parents. What did they think about your marriage to this Tamil?
Well, my father was dead against it.
Your father?
But he loved the Sinhalese. He would have been very happy if I had married a previous Sinhala boyfriend whom I had.
Right. Who was that?
But I had so many boyfriends.
Who was that? Who was the Sinhala boyfriend? You're not going to tell me.
That's a very, I'll tell you very privately. I call him a monster now.
So who is he? Tell me now. No? All right. But your mother?
My mother was liberal. We were all rebels in our family.
So this was the Grenier Jansons.
Absolute rebels. She couldn't really cope with us because we did our own thing, all of us.
But she coped with your husband, and presumably the grandchildren were great joy.
Oh, yes.
Your two twin daughters, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yes, that's nice. But Jean, you know, it's extraordinary to me that having been a bright young girl who then must have been one of the first in university. Tell me, you went to university in Jennings's time, is that right?
Yes, I remember talking to him when we were strolling about the campus meeting Jennings with his walking stick.
So this
and he
was
asked
just
us,
when Peradeniya was
yeah,
built.
how
Beautiful.
we were keeping, and I mean we had brilliant people, Father Pinto, Arasanayagam. Oh, how we teased him.
Right.
He was a young man fresh out of university and a brilliant scholar.
What subject? English?
History.
History.
He's dead now, but
Yeah,
he's
of course I remember
produced
the name,
lots of good books on Dutch period, and we were carefree. We weren't interested. Today it is getting ahead in life, ambition, getting your class, pursuing your research, getting your masters, your PhD, and so many other things. But we had plays. We had Irene van der Waal and Chitra Malalasekara coming in their ankle-length dresses and giving pianoforte recitals, you know, in the halls of residence. And
no, the people who've written of Peradeniya in the 50s,
yes,
the golden period.
Yes.
And then he went into teaching in Catholic schools, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right, because I mean the Methodists were a bit of a disappointment.
Right, so you went into...
Yeah, they were a bit of a disappointment.
So you taught at St. Anthony's, I think.
First of all in Kurunegala convent,
right.
and I wrote a lovely short story about my life there.
Yeah, the convent is just next door to my grandmother's house.
Yes, I
remember
know,
that,
those big houses, those beautiful houses.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I've written, my God, when I think of the life in that convent after leaving university, those gates closed at 6 o'clock in the evening, and those huge baying dogs let out, and the drunken drivers in their quarters, and here the nuns at their novenas and their prayers, and it was fantastic.
So in this convent, with all this chaos going on, dogs and drivers, the students and the teachers were all locked up.
The boarders were.
And what about the teachers?
The teachers, we all shared sort of partition dormitories.
Right.
But I accepted it.
No, of course.
And I mean, just out of university, but I couldn't bear to think that my freedom was curbed. And I loved to come home and with my books and my painting and music and parents and that kind of thing.
So St. Anthony's was better because
Loved
you
it.
went from home.
Loved it, but there also it was very alien to me because I didn't understand the rigidity of a lot of things that happened. Because there was this other life where, you know, the students had to come and confess what sins could they have committed at that age, Rajiva.
It was a boys' school, of course, and you must have been a wonderful
Friday
influence.
Confession, yes.
You must have been a wonderful
influence. Lots of them were very interested in me because I was very young at that time. But we kept a distance. Right. And they still come to see me. Lots of them are doing well in Australia. But one thing I am very sad about, even now, I feel guilt about discipline, the way it was exacted.
You think it was too strong? Because by the time I knew St. Anthony's, I think about the time I met you, Father Stephen, that was very gentle and loving and very nice.
But we had this master of discipline, and for any little shortcoming, the boys used to be lined out on the veranda, and he had the cane, and he would give them cuts. I thought, well, that's child abuse, and I mean, loss of dignity and respect for oneself, and trammeling your personality, and
that's bad.
Couldn't protest. Why didn't I? So I protest through my writing. When I mean, that's what I do even now, and what I did then.
But of course, the fascinating thing is, after all this, what I would call a safe background, despite these restrictions, suddenly, in 1983, you found yourself caught up as a refugee. And I still remember that line. You know, you talk about the anti-Tamil Rats of whatever, 58, 77, 81. And that line I'll never forget. And now I'm in it. The bridge is bombed and you can't cross over. And you found yourself married to a Tamil, having to leave your home and flee into a refugee center.
Yes.
That must have been extraordinary.
It is something that still stays with me and will permanently lodge in my mind and my heart. And I'm writing about a lot of things. The burger thing is being extended. And when I talk about identity, I talk about the loss as well as the realization. And I think that's one important thing that happened then. The realization that I had to proclaim that I had an identity that was unprejudiced and unbiased, and that I was going to strongly uphold for the rest of my life. I mean, I never thought of, I mean, what, burghers mingled with everybody. When I think of my father, my father's life, from Europeans to Eurasians, to Sinhalese, to Tamils, to Malays, they were all part of our life. We never had divisiveness or distinctions about any human being. But here, being cordoned off for one's safety, that safety will never ever be something that you can realize. You feel unprotected or vulnerable. But the realization, that has given me strength in my writing and gave me strength then. And I think it was very, very important.
It was extraordinary.
Absolutely.
I think those poems there were, to me, the high point. I'm
Thank
sad
you,
it was.
Rajiva.
I'm sad it was at
Thank
a terrible
you.
moment.
Thank you. It was terrible.
But one thing that also struck me is now the worst happened in July 1983.
Yes.
But you had before that sent me for the New Lankan Review,
Yes.
which I started to encourage Sri Lankan writing in
Yes.
English, a poem called Nallur, and at the launch at the British Council,
Yes.
before the riots, the poem was read by Richard de Souza, electric, and it was then I think that I understood that this poem is about a frightening human experience. It was prophetic. I mean, how did you write that poem? It was before the riot.
Because I was listening, reading. I heard a lot of things that other people didn't hear. And I was very aware. I was beginning to become politicized. Because I remember the first riots, that was in the 50s, and I was in my home listening to classical music. And then curfew was declared, the shops were burning in Candy Town, and I came out of my home, out of my house, to view what was happening, and there were truckloads of soldiers or police going around along the road, and they said, go inside, go inside. So I just went back, and it was it. But then there were other things that were happening. I mean...
But at least in 58, the police and soldiers tried to stop things.
Oh, yeah.
83, they didn't.
No, and I, at one stage, in fact, I should give you a copy of Fusillade. At one stage when I was in one of the refugee camps, looking just, you know, like a raggle-taggle gypsy, who comes into the camp but a contemporary of mine from Peradeniya. He was the DIG, Frank Silva.
Oh, right. Yes.
Still alive.
Yeah.
He comes, and Arsa said, you should go and meet him. And I went out on the corridor, and we faced each other, and I said, just look at me. I mean, can you recognize me? He was shocked to the marrow. And then he said, tonight you have to go back to my quarters and spend the night there. And even there, I didn't feel safe, though there was a sentry. And the most wonderful thing was to have a shower.
And Arasa went as well. I mean,
yes,
all
both
of you
of
went.
us.
Yeah, fine.
And the children.
The children.
The children.
You must have been very young then.
Oh,
10,
very
12,
young,
yeah.
sleeping on
Yeah.
sheets and all. I mean, well, Devi and Paru have both written a lot about those things. And coming out into the garden, I used to look down on Bogambara prison and watch the prisoners at their exercise. And I remember the sentry saying, you have nothing to be afraid of here. You're very safe. And Frank, listening to all the news on the phone about the movement of the people who were embarked on destruction and violence. And there was a Tamil who was also giving him information.
Right.
I think he's dead now. How they were moving and moving, you know, chariots of fire,
Yeah.
like
No
one could quell them. No one could quell them.
Well, I think government didn't try hard
No,
enough.
they didn't try. I mean, look, when we faced the mob, my brother and myself and the children were given shelter somewhere. That was a very dramatic thing. I think I should write a play about that, a one-act play. Because my brother, instead of going to the estate, he came home. Something compelled him to come. And after lunch, he had to have his afternoon nap. He was napping. And then I lifted the louvers and I saw the mobs on the road. Then I called him. I said, Pat, come out. And he was in the military, part-time. And he came out and he faced the mob and spoke to them and said, Puta, you know, we have nothing against you, Mahatya, because he was in the military also at that time. Then I thought, I must also go out. And I too went and said, what's wrong with you? I've been teaching you. You are my students. What are you doing on the road? But lots of them were strangers. And then there was
But were there students? Were there some of your students?
But they all knew we were teachers.
Right, yeah.
They all knew. We were well known. And then there was poor Mudyanse, whom we've written so much about, who was plucking mangoes, about 6 trees, delicious mangoes. And he was flourishing his knife. He was very loyal and faithful to us. And then he got a stone on his head. But the fact is that we felt, well, the house next door was burning, Tamil house. And of course, Pat and I rushed to the fence and all the crowd streamed in. And I said, is this a Dharmishta society? And Pat said, now, be quiet, Jean. Don't voice your thoughts aloud. But the house burnt and the people had to move away. And then we felt, well, it would be safer for us to move away. We spent the first night in my brother's income tax office. And the next day we moved to Pushpadana. But that's a whole life. I mean, people are writing, expatriate writers are writing about things they have not experienced. I think it's time. I wrote something, but in a very dispassionate way.
I must say, your poetry, I still remember you're talking about the old people there, the children. Very moving.
Yes, how the old man refused to take the garments offered him because they said they are not my own. And how the newly married couple brought a mattress in to sleep on. And everybody objected in that room and they had to remove it. Learned a lot about life, you know, and then we had Father Paul Kaspers and all these people who came in, and then we started doing things for other people. And that was important.
No, I think that.
And then the principal of my old school said, come with us, Jean. I said, no, I'm needed here. I want to be with my family. Then we moved to the campus. That was, oh my God, topsy-turvy in the sense that a place which was for intellectuals and academics and poetry and literature and history and everything, now a center for refugees.
Right. No, that was
and all the things that were
terrible, terrible period. Yeah. I must say, you know, horrible though it was,
yes,
I think those who encouraged it learnt their lesson, and it's never happened again. But the tensions have continued, and I think you know that even in society, there's some criticism in Sri Lanka of your poetry.
Absolutely.
Which I think is outrageous.
And not only my poetry, my personality and who I am.
No, I think
it's very strong. There is still non-acceptance of many aspects of my life, my personality, my being minoritarian, married to, well, a majority minoritarian, but there are lots of things in my surround which are not pleasant. So I have decided that I'm going to give myself all the freedoms that that are possible for me to enjoy, to be the kind of writer I want to. And I have a collection of poetry, it maybe stems from the past, breaking rules, because that's what I'm going to do now with my writing. I'm not going to conform. I never did conform, and I did not realize that I was non-conformist even at that stage, Rajiva. It was raw reality, and I wanted to document it. I mean, how did it happen? That's important, because Balfour Beatty sent all these crates of towels and clothes and Reader's Digests and old exercise books, and I pounced on this exercise book. It was somebody's scripture book, with lots of lovely, beautiful children's paintings. And that's where I first began writing all the poems in Apocalypse. Yes, I probably have it somewhere. But I think the tension about myself will never, ever go. But they can, well, Anne Ranasinger can write as much as she wants about the Holocaust. But I can't change people's mindset.
No, but I think in general it's appreciated, and certainly internationally you've had a massive impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, I went to Virginia and had to give a keynote address on identity, reconciliation, displacement, dispossession.
When was that?
That was 2012.
Right, and then this year you got
my doctorate in letters, and I gave a reading of my poetry and answered questions, at Bowdoin College. And there again, it was John Clifford Holt who introduced me, and I answered a lot of important questions. But I love my country, let me tell you that. I don't want to belong to any other country. I love it here because I've got so much and so much and so much. I would have had a very complacent sort of life, a very affluent life, you know, in Australia or England or Scotland. But you see, my skin has taken on the color and texture of this country.
That reminds me of one of your poems in which you talk of the skin,
Yes.
the verdigris even.
Absolutely.
But there's also a lovely line in it in which you talk about the cultural influences. And I still remember this phrase that you start talking about Palkavi, which is Sinhala peasant culture. But you feel that's also part of you.
Oh yeah, because I've written this marvelous book. You have no time to read because you're always at Geneva or you're somewhere else and you're reading something else, searching for an Ambalama. Because when I went to Kurunagala and I got your publisher to do a book of mine, Travelling
Right.
Woman, coming back, I saw this Ambalama. And then my mind went back to many years ago when we used to go to Ambake and, you know, all these beautiful Ambalamas. And I began thinking very deeply about it. And I wrote this, I gave the title, Searching for an Ambalama, and I wrote some very profound poems on the need for people to expend their hospitality outside of their homes and think of the wayfarer. I often think of myself as that, pilgrim, wayfarer, traveler, mendicant, everything under the sun. And I'm very influenced by Arasa's life because their lives were full of this sort of supernatural mysticism and, you know, they had temples on their land. Now it's a wasteland, of course, temples and all their festivals and swamis who were part of their lives. And I was influenced. I met one of them, Yoga Swami, and he spoke to us. And I don't know how important non-acceptance is now, because I read a lot about the most outstanding writers in Sri Lanka, and I think the names they mention are not that outstanding because they are not dealing with what is important and essential to humanity, society, community, and to rebuilding the structures that have been torn down. But I saw part of a lovely documentary yesterday on Jaffna in Tamil, and it gave me a lot of happiness to see.
Some things are coming up again.
The fruit, the vegetables, the cultivators, the people, the young girls cycling on the roads, the beautiful roads, the sort of structure that is beginning to emerge. On the other hand, I read of what is happening in the remote villages in the north. No proper infrastructure, no roads, no jobs, no water, no lights, and rape of a woman who was a widow who was raped by who knows whom. So that is rampant. So we need more people to investigate into that aspect of life which is not being developed or looked into.
No, I think there are improvements. I think one of the problems with rape and so on is it turns into a political issue.
Yes.
Instead of looking at, because a large number of rapes are actually by people within the society.
Yes.
But I'm afraid there's an effort to say, no, it's outsiders.
Yes.
And that prevents proper investigation. But I think you're perfectly right that we need to rebuild the community structures so that the communities are aware of internal problems and try to solve them internally through the police without getting outsiders in to deal with these.
That's right.
I think, but I'm glad that some things are improving.
They are.
But I think, what you said earlier, this need for acceptance, for understanding, is something we need to work hard at. And I think, Jean, if I may say so, you've spent all your life trying to achieve that.
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rajiva. There are lots of questions you need to ask me, but we have to spend much more time